"Daddy didn't die. He's under the floorboards," said the black girl. Then the police began digging. "Daddy is not going to die," the little girl whispered, her voice trembling yet firm. Her tiny hands gripped the edges of the dusty floorboards as if holding on to the last shred of her reality. "He's hidden under the floorboards." The police officers froze. The air around them thickened, the tension almost tangible. One of them, a seasoned detective with a furrowed brow, glanced at his partner. They had heard it all: crazy people, kids playing pranks, the occasional wild imagination. But there was something about the girl's words. They weren't just words, they were a revelation. And for a moment, doubt crept into their minds. The girl stood in the middle of the room, looking at them with wide, haunted eyes. There was no sign of fear in her gaze, just determination. She was telling the truth. The officer cleared his throat, trying to shake off the unease, his voice steady. "What do you mean, sweetheart? You said your father is hidden under the floor?" The girl nodded. "Yes, they told me he was dead, but he's not. He's under the floorboards. I saw him." The words echoed in the small, dimly lit room. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, trying to figure out if this was some elaborate game the girl was playing, or if she had truly uncovered something dark, something they couldn't ignore. But there was something in her eyes. Fear, yes, but also a hint of certainty, a certainty that froze them in place. "Sweetheart, what do you mean he's under the floor?" Another officer asked gently, kneeling down to meet her eye level. "Are you sure?" Her eyes never wavered. "I know what I saw." The house was eerily quiet, except for the occasional creak of the old wooden floors beneath their feet. It was a modest place, nothing extraordinary about it. But the girl, who couldn't be more than 8 or 9, was the key to unraveling a mystery far deeper than any of them could have imagined. Detective Harris, the senior officer, sighed and rubbed his temples. His shift was supposed to be over an hour ago, but now he was standing in the middle of an old, cramped living room, staring at a child who claimed her father was alive, hidden under the floorboards. The girl's name was Maya. She had always been a quiet child, keeping to herself, her head often buried in books or sketching pictures of places far away from this broken world she called home. The police had been called after neighbors reported strange noises coming from the house, but Maya had never acted out before. Her mother was never home, working late shifts at a diner. And her father, he was the one who made her feel safe, until one day he disappeared. The official story was that he died in a car crash. It was a story Maya had accepted, or rather forced herself to accept. But now the truth was clawing at her. Back in the present, Detective Harris snapped out of his thoughts, refocusing on the girl. "Maya, listen to me," he said softly, kneeling beside her. "If you're scared, we can help you. But we need to know the truth. What happened to your father?" Maya's voice was barely a whisper. "I didn't want to tell anyone. I thought it was my fault. But I know he's under the floor. They made me believe he was dead, but he's not. He's still here." The officers stood in silence, absorbing the gravity of what she had just revealed. Maya wasn't just talking about a simple misunderstanding. She was talking about something far darker, something that was right beneath their feet. For a moment, Detective Harris hesitated. Could they really dig up the floor, tear apart a child's home, based on a claim that seemed so fantastical? Or was there something more to this, something they couldn't afford to ignore? He nodded to his partner. "We're going to have to check." The creak of the floorboards echoed through the stillness of the room. Detective Harris's hands trembled slightly as he pried up the first board, his mind racing with thoughts of what could possibly lie beneath. The girl, Maya, stood by, silent but resolute. She had already told them where to look, but now it was up to the officers to uncover the truth. Her gaze never wavered from the spot she'd pointed to. It was almost as though she was waiting, hoping, no, knowing, that the truth would be revealed in that very moment. The other officer, Officer Daniels, glanced at Harris, his expression filled with doubt. "You really think she's telling the truth? I mean, it's a kid's imagination, right?" His voice was low, tinged with uncertainty. Harris didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled another floorboard up, revealing the dusty, dark void beneath the house. His fingers brushed the dirt, his heart thumping in his chest. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "Maya," he said, his voice surprisingly steady despite the growing tension. You're sure? You're sure he's under here? Maya nodded, her small head held high. Her dark eyes flickered with the kind of fear that could only come from a child who had witnessed something that no one should ever see. I'm sure, she whispered. The officers worked in silence, lifting more boards, searching through the dirt beneath. But the room remained eerily quiet, the weight of the moment pressing on them like an invisible force. With each board they pried up, they felt as though they were diving deeper into something they weren't prepared for. It wasn't just a missing person case. It was a nightmare waiting to be unearthed. There was nothing but dust and old forgotten debris in the spaces beneath the floor. No body, no clues. Just a quiet emptiness that made the hairs on the back of Harris's neck stand on end. For a moment, Harris almost allowed himself to believe that Maya's story was nothing more than a child's fantasy. He wiped his brow and took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. Maybe this was all just a misunderstanding, a frightened little girl letting her imagination get the better of her. But then, Daniels pulled something out of the dirt, something that made Harris freeze, a bloody shirt. It wasn't a shirt just thrown under there casually. It had been buried beneath the floorboards, hidden from the world. The fabric was old, stained with dark red blotches, some faded, some still vivid. Harris's stomach dropped as he stared at the shirt. His mind raced. Jesus, Daniels muttered under his breath. What the hell is this? Maya stepped forward slowly, her eyes locked on the shirt. There was no tremor in her voice when she spoke, just a quiet strength. I tried to tell you. I didn't want to, but I knew. I saw them take him. I saw them bury him. He didn't die in a crash. They lied. Harris felt the weight of her words hit him like a slap. The truth was becoming clearer, but with it came an overwhelming sense of dread. Something was terribly wrong. Maya, what are you saying? Harris asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she pointed to the shirt. That's his. I know it's his. The officers stood in stunned silence. They had walked into this case thinking they were dealing with a simple investigation. A missing person, a possible murder, and maybe a child who needed someone to talk to. But what they were uncovering now was something much darker. The room suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. Daniels handed the shirt over to Harris, who held it with trembling hands. It was heavy. The weight of the fabric in his grip was suffocating. He wanted to drop it, but something told him to hold on, to keep going, to find out what the hell had really happened here. Okay, we need to get a forensics team in here, Harris finally said, his voice low, filled with an urgency he hadn't felt before. We need to find out who this shirt belongs to, and we need to know what happened to your father, Maya. The little girl looked up at him, her face a mask of pain and relief. You'll find him. I know you will. He's under the floorboards, just like I said. The officers exchanged another look, the weight of the situation settling in. This was no longer just a missing person case. It was something far bigger, something far more dangerous. Harris turned to his partner. Get the team ready. We need to search the rest of this house. There could be more here than we know. The two officers began their search again, with a growing sense of unease. They had started this investigation thinking they were just uncovering a missing person's case, but now, with the bloodied shirt in hand and Maya's words echoing in their minds, they knew they were about to uncover something much darker. As they worked, Maya stood in the corner of the room, watching them with quiet resolve. She knew deep down that what they were about to find would change everything, but it was already too late to turn back. The truth was buried under these floors, and there was no escaping it now. The night dragged on, hours slipping away as the police continued to dig. The air in the house had grown thick with dust, but it wasn't just the particles in the air that weighed heavily on their minds. It was the growing realization that something far more sinister was unfolding right beneath their feet. Detective Harris couldn't shake the feeling that the truth was clawing its way up from the floorboards, just out of reach. Maya's words echoed in his mind, taunting him like a riddle he couldn't quite solve. He's not dead. He's under the floorboards. Each time the words replayed, they carried more weight, more significance. Harris wiped sweat from his brow, the room now thick with tension. Beside him, Officer Daniels continued to sift through the dirt and debris with a growing sense of urgency. They had already searched the house, top to bottom, but nothing had prepared them for what was coming. After hours of digging, Daniels reached into the earth, pulling out a small wooden box. It was old, worn, and covered in dust, but there was something about it that made Harris's heart race. This wasn't just any box. This was something important. "Detective, I think I've got something," Daniel said, his voice tinged with disbelief. Harris moved closer, his heart pounding in his chest as Daniels opened the box. Inside, wrapped in layers of worn fabric, was a small collection of photos. As Harris gingerly unfolded one of them, his stomach twisted. It was a photograph of a man, Maya's father. But the man in the picture was not the warm, smiling father figure Maya had described. This man was standing alongside men in suits, his face cold, his eyes dark, and there was something in his expression that made Harris's blood run cold. The whole picture was wrong. "What the hell is this?" Daniels asked, holding up another photo. This time the man was with a group of people who appeared to be part of some sort of underground organization, their faces obscured by shadows and the air around them seemed heavy with secrecy. Maya watched them from the corner, her face unreadable. She didn't flinch when the photos came out. She had known this moment was inevitable. She had known they would find these truths, buried in the darkest corners of her life. "Maya," Harris began cautiously, his voice softer now. "Who are these people in the photos? And what's your father involved in?" The girl's gaze softened as she stepped forward, her small hands trembling slightly. She swallowed hard before answering. "My father wasn't just a regular man. He was part of something dangerous. They told me it was all a lie, that he died in a car crash. But I know the truth." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of a decade's worth of fear, confusion, and anger. "They told me he was dead because he got too close to the wrong people. They were afraid of what he knew. And when he started talking, they did something about it." The deeper Harris and Daniels dug, the more tangled the story became. They found evidence that Maya's father wasn't just an innocent man trying to live a quiet life. He had been involved with criminals, dangerous people with connections in places the police didn't even want to think about. It turned out her father had been blackmailed for years, forced to keep his mouth shut about things he'd seen. Maya had been too young to understand it all at first. To her, her father had been a quiet, loving man who always protected her from the world. But she had seen the strange visitors at their house, the odd conversations and hushed voices, and the constant fear that seemed to hang in the air like a thick fog. As the officers continued searching, they uncovered something truly shocking. Buried under the floorboards, along with the box of photos, was a hidden stash of documents, financial records, contracts, and notes that hinted at shady dealings and a deeper conspiracy. One document stood out from the rest. It was a will, but not just any will. This one was written just a few weeks before Maya's father had died, and it contained a name, Maya's. The implications hit Harris like a ton of bricks. Maya's father hadn't been killed because of an accident or a random crime. He had been silenced because he knew too much. The documents hinted at a secret he had been planning to expose, something that could shake the very foundations of the people involved. Maya's voice was steady as she spoke again. "He knew they were going to come for him. That's why he left the clues for me. I don't know everything, but I know they were scared of him." Harris stared at her, realizing the enormity of what she had just revealed. "You're telling me your father was killed because of something he knew, and you've been living with this secret all this time?" Maya nodded. "I've known for a long time. I couldn't tell anyone. I was scared, but I had to. You needed to know." The officers were left reeling, trying to process the shocking revelation. The deeper they went into the mystery of Maya's father, the more dangerous it became. The people involved in these crimes weren't just local criminals. They were part of something much larger. And now Maya had unknowingly inherited the truth her father had been trying to protect. As the night wore on, the house grew quieter, the only sound the distant hum of a broken fan. The investigation was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The question now was, who else knew about Maya's father's secret? And what would they do to keep it buried forever? The early morning light filtered through the grimy windows of the small house, casting long shadows across the room. The police had been up all night, combing through the contents of the house, the disturbing photographs, and the documents they had uncovered beneath the floorboards. But despite all they had found, the truth still eluded them. The story wasn't over yet. It was only just beginning. Detective Harris sat at the worn dining table, staring at the stack of papers in front of him. The documents were scattered, each one more damning than the last. He could feel the weight of every piece of evidence pressing down on him. He knew they had stumbled onto something monumental, but there were still too many unanswered questions. What was Maya's father really involved in? What kind of secrets had he been hiding from the world? And most importantly, why had they chosen to kill him instead of simply silencing him? As Harris sifted through the papers, he found a particularly intriguing letter buried deep within the pile. The letter was typed, unsigned, and addressed to someone, perhaps a fellow conspirator or a trusted ally. The letter was vague yet chilling. It spoke of a plan to expose something major, something that could bring down powerful people. Harris read the words carefully, trying to piece them together. "You know what's at stake. If this gets out, everything will change. Be ready. I've made my choice." That was all the letter said. It left much to the imagination, but Harris didn't need more. He had enough. The plan had been set in motion before Maya's father was silenced. Whoever wrote the letter had intended to expose something powerful, and Maya's father had known the risk. Meanwhile, Officer Daniels was going over the photos they had found. Each photo seemed to reveal more about Maya's father's hidden life. The man in the photos wasn't just a family man, he was part of something far darker. He had been deeply involved with people who had power, connections that reached into dangerous, unseen places. But who were these people? What was their agenda? As Daniels examined the photos, something caught his eye. A name written on the back of one of the photographs, J. Calloway. The name didn't ring a bell, but it was clear that it held significance. The photo was of Maya's father standing next to a man with a sharp suit and an air of authority. Calloway's presence was commanding. There was no mistaking it. This wasn't just an ordinary business partnership. Back in the living room, Maya had been sitting quietly, her small body curled into the corner of the couch. She hadn't said much since the police arrived, but her mind was working overtime. She could feel the walls closing in, the weight of the truth pressing on her chest. Every time she thought about her father, the questions started to multiply. Why had he kept these secrets from her? Why hadn't he told her more? Had she been wrong to believe the lies? Was there more to his death than she had ever been told? Her eyes drifted to the window, watching the sun rise over the horizon, bathing the world in pale gold. For the first time in years, the world felt like it was changing in a way that left her unsettled, uncertain. Her father had always promised her that he would protect her, that everything would be okay. But now, with the truth starting to surface, she couldn't help but feel like the ground beneath her was crumbling away. Back at the table, Harris and Daniels exchanged glances. They had made significant progress, but they knew that time was running out. Whoever Maya's father had been involved with wouldn't stay quiet forever. They were powerful, dangerous people, and they would stop at nothing to keep their secrets buried. "Detective," Daniel said quietly, his voice low, "I think we need to dig deeper into this Calloway person. This might be the break we need." Harris nodded, deep in thought. "Agreed, but we have to be careful. We don't know how far this goes. We're not just dealing with criminals. We're dealing with people who have the means to make this all disappear. We have to tread lightly." As Harris and Daniels continued to discuss their next steps, Maya sat silently, her thoughts racing. She knew they were getting closer to the truth, but part of her wasn't sure if she was ready to face it. What if her father had been involved in something terrible? What if she had spent all these years idolizing a man who was far from the hero she thought he was? Her mind drifted back to the moments she had shared with him. His gentle smile, his reassuring voice, the way he had always made her feel safe. She remembered how he used to tell her stories, how he always made her laugh. But now those memories felt tainted. They felt like lies. Maya's heart ached. She had lost so much already. Her mother had never been around, working long hours at the diner, and her father had been her only family. But now even he was gone. swallowed up by secrets and deceit. She felt a lump form in her throat. She didn't know if she could keep going. She didn't know if she could keep uncovering the truth about her father. But one thing was clear. She had no choice. The truth had to come out. As the investigation intensified, the officers began to follow the trail left by the elusive Jay Calloway. They tracked down the name, only to find a surprising connection. Calloway wasn't just a businessman. He was the leader of a shadowy network that operated in the underworld, and Maya's father had been deeply involved in it. The deeper they dug, the more dangerous it became. Maya's father had been a whistleblower, but he hadn't been alone. There were others, people who had been in his circle, people who were just as determined to expose the truth. And now those same people were at risk of being silenced forever. Harris leaned back in his chair, the weight of the situation sinking in. They were no longer dealing with just a missing person or a simple case of murder. They were uncovering a vast conspiracy, one that reached into the highest echelons of society. And Maya, with her father's knowledge, was now in the crosshairs. "Maya," Harris said, standing up, "you're safe here for now, but we need you to stay close. We're about to enter dangerous territory and the truth will come at a cost." Maya nodded silently, her mind still spinning. She didn't know how much longer she could handle the pressure, but she knew one thing for certain. Her father's story was far from over, and she had to be the one to finish it. The sun had barely risen, and the world outside still carried the lingering weight of the night. But inside the house, the tension had reached a boiling point. The truth was out there now. Maya's father hadn't just been an innocent victim, he had been part of something far darker. And the more the police uncovered, the more dangerous it became. Detective Harris stared at the map spread out before him, each line drawn with the careful precision of someone who had spent too much time in the shadows. The web of connections they were uncovering seemed to stretch across the city and beyond. The people involved in this conspiracy were no small-time criminals. They were powerful, dangerous, and they had the resources to make anyone who got too close disappear. "I've been going over these documents all night," Harris muttered, rubbing his eyes. "We're dealing with something much bigger than we thought. Calloway's network isn't just local, it's international. We're talking about arms deals, money laundering, and who knows what else." Daniels, who had been working with him, glanced at the map. "So what do we do now? We've already stirred the pot by looking into Calloway. If we go any further, we're going to end up as targets ourselves." Harris paused, considering. "We don't have a choice. We need to finish this." Maya's father didn't die for nothing. He tried to expose these people for a reason. And now it's up to us to finish what he started. Maya had been sitting quietly in the corner, her gaze fixed on the floor. The weight of everything was beginning to sink in. She had always known her father had secrets, but she never imagined they were this dark. Now, those same secrets were threatening to consume everything. Her, the officers, everyone. "Detective," she said quietly, her voice shaking. What happens if they come after me? I'm just a little girl. I didn't ask for any of this." Harris turned to her, his expression softening. "You're not alone in this, Maya. We're going to protect you, I promise." But even as he spoke, Harris knew the danger was growing by the minute. The people they were dealing with didn't care about promises. They only cared about power. And if they knew Maya had uncovered their secret, they wouldn't stop until she was silenced too. Later that evening, as darkness settled in, the tension in the house grew unbearable. The officers were preparing to leave for another round of questioning when the knock came. It was soft, almost polite, but there was something about it that made Maya's stomach churn. She wasn't sure what made her glance toward the window, but when she did, her blood ran cold. A black car was parked outside, quiet, unassuming, but there was something about the way it sat there, still as a shadow, that sent an icy chill down her spine. "Detective, I think we're about to have company," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. Harris immediately stood up, signaling to Daniels. "Stay close, Maya. Whatever happens, don't leave this room. Got it?" Maya nodded, her eyes wide with fear. The knock came again, louder this time, more urgent. Harris motioned for Daniels to stay low as he approached the door. The air seemed to vibrate with the weight of anticipation. He opened it carefully, only to be met by a man wearing a black suit. Tall, well-dressed, and carrying an air of authority that was impossible to ignore. "I'm here to speak with Detective Harris," the man said, his voice calm, even courteous. "I'm Detective Harris. Who's asking?" Harris replied, trying to keep his voice steady. He wasn't sure if this was a friendly visit or if they were about to walk into a confrontation they couldn't get out of. The man's lips twitched slightly, a cold smile barely forming. "You've been poking around in things you don't fully understand, Detective. I think it's time you stopped." The man stepped forward, his eyes locking with Harris. It wasn't a question, it was a threat. The tension was palpable. Daniel stepped closer, ready to defend his partner, but Harris held up a hand, signaling him to wait. "You don't know who you're dealing with," the man said, his tone growing colder. "There are forces at play here that you'll never fully comprehend. So I suggest you back off before things get messy." Harris didn't flinch. He had faced danger before. But this was different. There was something about this man, his calm demeanor, his confidence, that sent a ripple of unease through him. It was like standing in front of a predator, waiting for it to strike. "I'm not backing off," Harris said, his voice firm. "Your network is falling apart. I know what you're involved in, and I'm not going to stop until I get to the truth." The man's smile faded, replaced by an expression of cold, calculating menace. "You've made a mistake, Detective. You're not the one who gets to decide when this ends." He turned toward the door, signaling for someone to follow him. But as he did, he spoke one final warning. "You're out of your depth. Leave this alone, or the next knock you hear won't be from me. It'll be from someone who doesn't care about your badge." The man stepped into the shadows, disappearing into the night. Harris closed the door slowly, his mind racing. That wasn't just a threat. It was a warning. The man wasn't working alone. He had people everywhere. Powerful people who could wipe out anyone who got in their way, including Maya. "Maya," Harris said, turning toward her, his face grim. "We need to move fast. This isn't just a case anymore. This is bigger than you or me. We're dealing with a network that will do anything to protect its secrets." Maya nodded, her face pale. She had known this was coming, but hearing it out loud made it feel all too real. The danger was no longer something in the shadows. It was right in front of them, and there was no escaping it. But as Harris looked at Maya, he saw something in her eyes. It wasn't fear, it was determination. She wasn't going to back down, no matter how dangerous things got. Neither would he. They were in this together, and whatever happened next, they would face it head on. The air was thick with tension, the house eerily quiet after the man's departure. Harris stood in the doorway, staring out into the night, watching the black car disappear down the street. Every instinct in him screamed that the warning wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. The walls were closing in, and time was running out. As the officers regrouped in the living room, the weight of the situation settled in. Harris could feel the exhaustion in his bones, the pressure of the case pressing down on him. He'd dealt with criminals before, but this was different. This wasn't just about crime, it was about survival. They were up against a network so powerful that it could make entire families vanish without a trace. Daniels poured himself a cup of coffee, trying to shake off the tension. "We can't keep doing this, Harris. We've uncovered too much. Whoever these people are, they have eyes everywhere. We're putting ourselves and Maya in grave danger." Harris didn't respond immediately. He couldn't afford to show fear, but the truth was, Daniels was right. They had crossed a line, but backing down wasn't an option. Not anymore. "Maya's father didn't die for nothing," Harris said finally, his voice tight with determination. "We're too close to the truth to back off now." Maya sat in the corner, her legs pulled up to her chest. She was quieter than usual, her mind clearly racing. It was clear she was trying to make sense of everything. The shocking revelations, the bloodstains, the photographs, the letters, and the words that had haunted her since the beginning. She had never imagined her father's life had been anything other than simple. He had always been the protector, the one who held the family together. Yet in the blink of an eye, her entire world had been shattered. The father she had loved and trusted had been part of something so much darker than she could have ever imagined. It had been hard enough learning he was gone, but learning the truth about how he had been killed and why was a betrayal that stung deeper than anything. She had spent years grieving for the wrong reasons, and now even her memories of him seemed tainted. Still, there was something inside her, something strong, that refused to let the darkness take hold. She wasn't just a victim. She was his daughter, and she would make sure his sacrifice meant something. Later that evening, after the others had left to continue their investigation, Harris sat down next to Maya. The house was quiet now, the night stretching on like an endless shadow. Maya, I know this is hard, he said, his voice soft but firm, but I need you to stay strong. We're going to make sure your father's story is told. You're not alone in this. We're in this together. Maya looked up at him, her eyes wide with something more than just sadness. There was determination there, a spark of resolve. She had lost everything she thought she knew, but she wasn't going to lose herself. I'm not afraid, she said, her voice steady. I want to know the truth, and I'm going to make sure they can't hide it anymore. Harris nodded. She was stronger than he had given her credit for, but he knew this journey wasn't going to be easy. The deeper they dug, the more dangerous it became. Every clue they uncovered would lead them to more questions, and each answer would bring them closer to a confrontation they might not survive. The next few days were a blur. Harris and Daniels worked tirelessly, following leads, piecing together fragments of information. Every step they took seemed to bring them closer to the heart of the conspiracy. But they were also drawing closer to the people who would stop at nothing to keep their secrets buried. They discovered more about Jay Calloway, the man who had been at the center of it all. Calloway wasn't just a businessman, he was a master manipulator who had his hands in every shady deal imaginable. Arms deals, illegal trading, blackmail, nothing was too dirty for him. And Maya's father had been one of the few who had the courage to stand up to him. But as they uncovered more, they realized the cost of the truth was higher than they had ever imagined. Maya's father hadn't just been a whistleblower, he had been a target from the start. The conspiracy went deeper than anyone had expected, and now Maya had become a target as well. The people involved wouldn't let her live to tell her father's story. Harris and Daniels knew they were running out of time. Every move they made seemed to be watched, every phone call intercepted. They couldn't trust anyone outside their circle. Not anymore. The police station had become a place of constant surveillance, a cage they couldn't escape. I don't know how much longer we can keep this up, Daniel said one night as they sat in the small, dimly lit office, their faces weary from days of relentless searching. We have to keep going, Harris replied, his eyes dark with the weight of the decision. If we stop now, we're not just giving up on Maya, we're giving up on everything her father stood for. Meanwhile, Maya had been doing her own investigating. While Harris and Daniels followed their leads, Maya pored over the documents they had uncovered, trying to make sense of her father's life. She wasn't going to sit idly by and wait for them to solve everything. She had her own questions, questions only her father's records could answer. One evening she found something, a final letter. It was dated the day before her father's death, his handwriting shaky and urgent. In it, he spoke of his plans to leave town, to go into hiding with Maya, but the final words shook her to her core. They know I'm close to exposing everything. If something happens to me, you have to finish what I started. Don't trust anyone but the police. The truth is bigger than you think. Maya stared at the letter for a long time. Her father had known he was going to die. He had known the danger he was in, and had still fought for the truth. Now it was her turn to take that fight forward. The truth was within reach, but Maya's courage was now the only thing standing between her and the people who would do anything to silence her. Harris and Daniels could only protect her for so long. If they wanted to survive, they would have to expose the truth before it was too late. But even as they raced against time, one question lingered in the air. Would they be able to uncover the full scope of the conspiracy before it consumed them all? The days that followed were a blur of urgency and tension. The more Harris and Daniels uncovered, the more they realized the full scope of the conspiracy they had stumbled into. The network of power, corruption, and crime ran deeper than they could have ever imagined. But despite the growing danger, they were getting closer to the truth. Maya hadn't slept properly in days. Her mind was consumed with her father's unfinished mission and the weight of the secrets she now carried. Every step she took toward the truth felt like a step closer to the edge of a precipice. a place she didn't know if she could come back from. But she knew there was no turning back. She had come too far to stop now. Sitting alone in the quiet of the house, Maya glanced at the photo of her father that had been left on the table. The man she had known and loved was no longer the same man. He wasn't just her protector. He was a man who had stood up to something much bigger, much darker than either of them could have ever comprehended. She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the past few days press against her chest. There was so much fear inside her, but also something else: strength. Her father had known what he was up against. He had risked everything to expose the truth. And now it was her turn to finish what he had started. Detective Harris sat across from Maya, his face tired but resolute. The latest round of investigation had uncovered something they hadn't expected: a documentary, a detailed account of Calloway's illegal empire, hidden in plain sight. It was the final piece of the puzzle. "Maya," Harris said softly, pushing the document toward her. "This is it. This is what your father was trying to expose. It's everything. What Calloway has been doing, the lives he's destroyed, and how deep it goes. But it's dangerous." Maya picked up the document, her fingers trembling. The words on the page were chilling. It wasn't just a list of crimes. It was a web of manipulation, blackmail, and murder. Calloway and his network had their hands in every corner of society, from politics to business to law enforcement. No one was safe. "But this," Harris continued, "this is your father's legacy, the truth he died for. Now it's in your hands." Maya swallowed hard, a lump forming in her throat. "I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I'm strong enough." Harris leaned forward, his eyes steady. "You are. Your father wasn't a hero because he never doubted himself. He was a hero because he kept going, even when everything seemed impossible. You have that same strength. You're not just his daughter. You're a part of this fight. And now it's your turn to finish it." Maya stared out the window, watching as the world moved on without knowing the chaos that was unfolding just beneath the surface. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over everything, but inside her, the storm still raged. She thought about the lessons her father had taught her, about standing up for what was right, even when it was hard. He had always told her that the world wasn't fair, but that didn't mean she couldn't make a difference. Now, as she stood on the precipice of something far bigger than she had ever imagined, those lessons had never been clearer. Her father had sacrificed everything for the truth, and now it was time for her to do the same. But the question lingered in her mind: what would it cost to expose the truth? She had already lost her innocence, her sense of security. Was the truth worth the sacrifice? Was it worth the risk? The police had prepared everything. They were ready. They had the evidence, everything they needed to bring down Calloway's empire. But as they prepared for the final confrontation, Harris knew that they were walking into the lion's den. "Maya," Harris said, looking at the girl who had been through so much, "you don't have to be here. We can handle this." Maya shook her head, her eyes hard with resolve. "I'm not afraid anymore. I have to do this. For my father. For everyone he tried to save." And so the confrontation began. They had set up a meeting with one of Calloway's most trusted lieutenants, a man who had been involved in everything. They didn't know how much he knew or how far Calloway's reach extended, but they knew it was their only shot. As the meeting took place, Maya and Harris stood just outside, watching through the shadows. The tension in the air was palpable. Calloway's men weren't just criminals. They were professionals, and they were as dangerous as they came. But what Maya hadn't expected was the sudden appearance of someone she recognized: Jay Calloway himself. He stepped into the room, his cold gaze falling on Maya and Harris. He didn't speak at first. Instead, he just stood there, sizing them up. "You've been digging too deep," Calloway said, his voice calm but full of malice. "You really thought you could take me down. You're just a little girl, and he was just a man who didn't know when to stop. This ends now." But Maya wasn't afraid anymore. She had already seen the worst, and now she was ready to face it. "You're wrong," Maya said, her voice steady, unwavering. "It doesn't end now. It ends when people like you are brought to justice." Calloway's eyes narrowed, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Then, before anyone could react, Maya stepped forward, holding up the documents they had uncovered. "This is everything," she said, her voice steady. "This is the proof. And it's all going to the authorities. The authorities moved in swiftly. Calloway and his men were arrested, their empire collapsing in a matter of hours. Maya's father's legacy was secured, and the truth had finally come to light. But for Maya, the battle wasn't over. She had faced her darkest fears, uncovered painful truths, and fought for her father's honor. Now she would carry his legacy forward, knowing that no matter how difficult the journey, she had the strength to walk it. The truth was not always easy, and it didn't always come without cost. But sometimes the greatest battles are the ones we fight within ourselves. Maya's fight wasn't just against the criminals who had hurt her family. It was against the fear and doubt that had held her back for so long. In the end, she learned that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to face it, and that sometimes the greatest gift you can give to those you love is to stand up for what's right, no matter the price. If you've ever faced an overwhelming force in your life, share your story in the comments. And if you believe in standing up for what's right, hit that like button.